All right, it's officially 10 o'clock. So welcome to the second webinar of this academic course, but the first webinar for 2023. My name is Sam and I'm from New Zealand, but my life is now in Spain. And I live and work here in San Sebastian at London School of Languages as a teacher and teacher trainer. And I'll be taking you through today's webinar, which is all about the world of phrasal verbs. So let's go. So what are we going to cover today? Well, to begin with, we're going to start with a definition of what a phrasal verb is and examine the 4 different types that course books usually refer to. Then we'll go on a whirlwind tour of phrasal verbs throughout history, not the full-blown version, we'd need a webinar marathon for that, but just touching on some key moments. And after that, we'll look at the relevance of word lists and concordances to phrasal verbs. Don't worry if you're not sure what I mean by that, it'll all become clear soon enough. And next, we'll get on to some more practical elements. how to actually teach phrasal verbs. And this will include being able to identify some of the difficulties that our students typically have, and then obviously some ways to help with these. And I'll include a bit more detail about one way in particular, the conceptualizing the particle. And then, just before we conclude, I'll share some simple practice activities for the classroom. And of course, there'll be time for some questions at the end, should you have any. So let's get started. All right, what exactly do I mean by phrasal verb? Well, let's go right back to square one with the term. Obviously, it contains the word verb, which is a word that describes an action, condition, or experience. And like you see on the screen here, the black block represents a verb. For example, we could say, I ran early this morning. But in today's case, we also have phrasal, which implies a group of words. So when we refer to a phrasal verb, we mean a group of words that describes an action, condition, or experience. Something like this. The formerly single black block now has got company, but they all still function as one verb. So we could say, in the first one, I woke up early this morning. Or, I'm looking forward to running early tomorrow morning as well. All true, honestly. And by the way, I know I'm stating the obvious here, but this is why in course books or grammar books, you'll often see phrasal verbs referred to as multi-word verbs. However, before we go any further, I must mention there is some debate regarding the exact definition of a phrasal verb. Some books use multi-word verbs as the umbrella term, and phrasal verbs are but one type, whereas others use phrasal verbs as the overarching grammatical term. But for the purposes of today, we will consider a phrasal verb as a verb plus one or two particles. And now, what is a particle? You might ask. Well, it's either an adverb or a preposition. And knowing whether a particle is an adverb or a preposition can be a little tricky because the same word can actually function as both. And sometimes verbs just happen to be followed by a preposition and they're not even classified as phrasal verbs. But before we get into the analysis, let's take a walk back in time to around the 5th century. So way back in the day, there was Old English. And this was a language that doesn't really resemble what we consider as English today. It was spoken by the Anglo-Saxons in England from the 5th to around the 11th century. And it used a lot of prefix verbs. For example, as you can see on the screen, the prefix for meant up, and it was typically attached to the front of the verb. And their syntax as well generally went subject, object, verb. That's what the SOV stands for there. So then, as time went on in the 11th century, there was a lot of turmoil. In fact, there was the Norman conquest of England, famous for King Harold losing his eye and dying in the Battle of Hastings in 1066, supposedly. And the picture on the screen is from the Bayeux tapestry, which depicts this invasion. And as a result of this, there was a huge language shift, and the Norman conquest is largely responsible for many phrasal verbs having a Latin equivalent, because afterwards, a lot of old French words were then incorporated into the English language. For example, and pardon my French accent, découvrir, the Old French, then became the English discover. And this likely slowed the progress of phrasal verbs, as there were now competing words, and French had the advantage as the language of status. So it was typically spoken by the upper classes. And therefore phrasal verbs, which had existed prior, they were sort of now considered more informal, and an attitude which actually continues to this very day. And lastly, there was a shift in syntax order from the previous subject, object, verb to subject, verb, object. And this probably helped enable the prefixes of Old English to change their position to come after the verb and become the particles of today. So now time continues to march on, and the use of phrasal verbs really exploded or took off. See what I did there? In the 16th century with early modern English. According to one study, Shakespeare's plays include 5,744 phrasal verbs with approximately 1,900 distinct meanings. So their use was definitely gaining momentum, which takes us through to nowadays, where phrasal verbs are ubiquitous. They're everywhere, particularly when speaking, and they still maintain that aura of being considered informal. Now, new and creative phrasal verbs are being introduced to English all the time. While some might not officially be in a dictionary yet, they are sure to be understood because of the meanings which underlie the particles that help form phrasal verbs. And the term for this is conceptual metaphor. And more on that later in the webinar. An example here is to fail upwards, which is not in the Cambridge Dictionary at the moment, though I do expect it to be there soon enough. And for those interested, it means to advance your career despite a failure or lack of qualifications, often used in celebrity circles a lot at the moment. And we also have a lot of nouns and adjectives which are derived from phrasal verbs as well. The example here, a hand-me-down, refers to an item of clothing that has been given to a younger person because they no longer want it. And the phrasal verb responsible for this, to hand down something to someone because you no longer need it. All right, history class is over, and now we're going to do some phrasal verb analysis. So the first sentence to look at, Bob looked up the chimney. Question. Well, oh, by the way, big shout out to Bob. He's a great friend and a fellow teacher who actually just happens to be my go-to name for examples. So thank you, Bob. Right, let's get back to business. So where did Bob look? Up the chimney. Can we change the order and it still makes sense? Up the chimney Bob looked? Yes, we can. A little unusual, but yes, it's correct. Can we insert an adverb between the verb and the particle being up? Bob looked carefully up the chimney? Correct. Can we separate the object from the particle, the chimney and up? Bob looked the chimney up? No, we can't. We cannot separate the object here from the preposition up. What did Bob look up? And here, when we say it, or when I say it, the stress is on the verb look. So what conclusions can we draw from this, these questions? Well, that up the chimney is its own syntactic unit. It's a prepositional phrase that tells us where Bob looked, and it can be separated from the verb. So look up in this context is not a phrasal verb. In other words, it's just a verb followed by a preposition, when up the chimney is its own prepositional phrase, which is and up cannot be separated from that. All right, let's look at another. Bob looked after the children. Where did Bob look? After the children. That doesn't sound right. Can we change the order and it still makes sense? After the children Bob looked? No, we can't. Can we insert an adverb between the verb and particle? Bob looked carefully after the children. No, we can't. Can we separate the object from the particle? Bob looked the children after? Nope. So, what are the conclusions from this? That after is a preposition here because it introduces a noun complement, the children. However, it cannot be separated from the verb like what we saw before. So this implies that the connection between look and after is much stronger, and that combined they have their own meaning. And for these reasons, we call it a phrasal verb, or you might see phrasal prepositional verb. All right, next one, number 3. Bob looked up the word. Again, where did Bob look? Up the word? No, doesn't sound right. Can we change the order and it still makes sense? Up the word Bob looked? Nope. Can we insert an adverb between the verb and particle? Bob looked carefully up the word? No. Can we separate the object from the particle? Oh, Bob looked the word up. Big tick there. Yes, we can. What did Bob look up? Answer, the word. Up is stressed in this case. All right. What about the conclusions here? So up here is an adverb. And while it doesn't, because it does need a noun complement here, but it can be separated from it, unlike the previous example. So up also forms part of the verb's meaning as a single unit. So look and up have a strong bond here as well. And so this one we call a transitive phrasal verb. Don't worry if you're not sure what that means. See it in a moment. And in this case, the meaning is fairly idiomatic. It's not literal. It's not looking up and seeing a word on the ceiling. No, it's got a sort of idiomatic meaning, which is very common with phrasal verbs. All right, final one. The economy is looking up. What is looking up? The economy. Is there an object? No, there isn't. Is up part of a prepositional phrase? No, it just finishes right there. The economy is looking up. Can we insert an adverb between the verb and particle? Like this, the economy is looking clearly up? No, we can't. Is up closely tied to the verb? Like the other examples of phrasal verbs we saw? Yes, it is. So the conclusions from this final one, that up does not form a prepositional phrase, so it must be an adverb. However, unlike the previous look up, there is no object here. The economy is looking up. That's it. No object after it. And up also alters the verb's meaning. So in this case, look up forms what we call an intransitive phrasal verb. So to summarize all that, or now that we've seen the differences between the types of phrasal verbs, I'm going to show you a table that, summarizes everything we've just seen. So here we go. As you can see, the first type here has a verb and an adverb with no object, the one we just saw before. Hence the name intransitive phrasal verb. That's what it means, a phrasal verb with no object. For example, the economy is looking up, so the company won't go under. 2 examples there. The second type now has a preposition. And because it has a preposition, it needs an object. So this means it's transitive. And remember that with a preposition, we can't separate it from the object. So the example sentence, Bob called on his neighbor to ask him to look after his dog. So his neighbor and his dog, they have to follow on and after there. They are inseparable from the on and after. And the third type, these are also transitive verbs. So there is an object as well. However, the particle is an adverb. And because it's an adverb, that means that we can separate it from the object, like in the example sentence. Bob looked up the word, but then he forgot to give the dictionary back to me. So as you can see, the dictionary is placed in between give and back, or it could just as happily go after. Bob forgot to give back the dictionary to me. Yes. All right. And lastly, there are the verbs with 2 particles, an adverb and a preposition. And because there is a preposition, an object must follow. And these are often called phrasal prepositional verbs. Bob is looking forward to visiting his family because they get on well with each other. And so while this table is useful, I guess you're probably not going to draw it up every time you come across a phrasal verb, but there are some key things that I'd like to, or that I'd highlight to students from what we've just seen, that when teaching phrasal verbs in class. So key things to remember here. Firstly, does the phrasal verb require an object? And so, like the table showed us, yes, if it's transitive, it does. If it's transitive, it doesn't. If there's a preposition there, yes, it needs an object. Whereas if it's an adverb, it depends. So an adverb could be either transitive or intransitive. And this is very important because if students forget the object, we miss the crux of the sentence. So Bob called on. Bob looked after. Who? We need that information. So that object is crucial if it requires one. All right, next thing. Is the phrasal verb separable or not? And remember, this only applies if the particle is an adverb. So for example, Bob decided to look up the word in a dictionary. Perfectly correct sentence. Or Bob decided to look the word up in a dictionary. That also works equally as well. Now, if you're not sure, though, if it's separable or not, and you want to play it safe, yeah, you can always put the object at the end. And you would be right a lot of the time. However, when it's separable, object pronouns must go between the verb and adverb. By that, I mean, in this case, Bob decided to look it. If we're replacing the word with it must go between. We cannot say Bob decided to look up it in a dictionary. That doesn't work grammatically. And finally, be aware that the meaning can fall on a spectrum from the literal, and hence obvious, to metaphorical and idiomatic. And this means that some, or well, actually many, phrasal verbs are often initially difficult for students to grasp, to understand what they mean. Because when it's idiomatic, you can't simply look at the words and automatically click to the meaning. But later in the webinar, we are going to look at something to help with this. And that concludes the analysis of phrasal verbs, the rules and the grammar that govern them. So now we're going to move on to looking at the actual language and what we want our students to know. And to start us off, we'll consider the relevance of word lists. So let's just take a moment to consider, what language do we want our students to know? And the phrasal verbs we've seen so far today, the look up, the call on, the wake up, how necessary are they? How do we choose which phrasal verbs to teach? And one resource teachers often go to inform themselves about how relevant words are is frequency word lists. And probably the most renowned is the Longman 3000. It's a fantastic document, very well researched, and describes itself as a list of the 3,000 most frequent words in both spoken and written English, based on statistical analysis of the 390 million words contained in the Longman Corpus Network. It's a lot. The Longman Communication 3000 represents the core of the English language and shows students of English which words are the most important for them to learn and study in order to communicate effectively in both speech and writing. And what they've found is fascinating. So analysis shows that these 3,000 most frequent words in spoken and written English account for 86% of the language. Okay, great. This is useful information, especially as a lot of the words that make up phrasal verbs are fairly common. At, on, in, get, go. They're all there in the top 1,000. However, there is one slight problem here, and that is the word list focuses purely on individual words. It misses the frequency of get up or call on as its own syntactic unit. And so with this document, we don't really know the frequency of when these common words are combined to create new meanings that we know as phrasal verbs. So what we really need is a phrasal verb frequency list. And fortunately, a study, well, what about phrasal verbs? Yes, but fortunately, a study by Garnier and Schmidt in 2015 did just that. They created a phrasal verb frequency list. But we're not actually going to look at this, though the citation is there if you'd like to check it out later to see the most common phrasal verbs. What we're going to look at now is where the information actually came from, the data. So, yeah, word lists do not just appear out of thin air. It's not like some researchers are sitting around and thinking, yeah, I hear that phrasal verb a lot. I'm going to put it down as number one. No, you need some sort of tool to analyze the vast bank of language that we have. And this is a corpus, for example, the British National Corpus. And the tool to analyze the corpus is called a concordance. And a concordance is a list of the words in a text or group of texts with information about where in the text each word occurs and how often. The data provides real examples of language in use and usually offers the ability to search across written and/or spoken material, as well as to look out for specific features such as collocations. And it looks something like this when you search for a word. You're looking at what's known as the quick view, or the KWIC, which stands for keyword in center. And it nicely shows the linguistic environment of a word. Find out here. And so concordances are extremely useful for several things. For checking the frequency of a word, the expression, the phrase, phrasal verb in this case, and seeing the difference in use between spoken and written texts. Exploring the surrounding language, the collocations that also go with it, for example, and real examples of language in use. So from a corpus, all those examples are something real. They're taken from a book or a film, what people say. And to show you just how useful they are statistically, I've got a little table here. So first, let's look at the verbs find out and discover. Discover being, you could say, the Latin equivalent of the phrasal verb find out. And as we can see, you would expect the phrasal verb to be fairly frequent, which it seems to be, especially in spoken text where it's, almost 9 times more frequent than discover. And then, interestingly enough, it's also more frequent than discover in writing, which perhaps tells us that we shouldn't be so strict maybe and not have the Middle Ages attitude towards phrasal verbs in writing. All right, below that, I've red flagged the next 2 phrasal verbs because I was looking at various websites and blogs, boasting about the top 10 most common phrasal verbs, top 20, top 50, that kind of thing. And these 2 were on a few of those lists. And so I was curious and I plugged them into the concordance, and the results are what you can see here. Essentially, these phrasal verbs are not in frequent use, and they weren't in Garnier and Schmidt's top 150 most common phrasal verbs either. And so they exist on these lists that, students can see or teachers might use, but we do have to ask ourselves, are we giving our students the most appropriate language for their needs? Well, luckily, Cambridge has put together an excellent resource called the English Vocabulary Profile Online. And this can answer the question here about what our learners need to know. So this website is able to help us isolate different types of words on different topics and according to level as well. For example, right here on the screen, you're looking at the 4 phrasal verbs that an A1 level student is expected to know. Come from, wake up, go out, and get up. And these have obviously been selected after copious amounts of research. And what's really interesting here, though, is to see what happens as we move through the levels. So this graph shows the increasing expectations about the number of phrasal verbs for each level, which is particularly useful to know if you have students taking exams. The exact numbers are here. And as you can see, there is quite a jump from A2 to B1, and then again from B1 to B2, whereas B2 to C1, fairly minimal. And by the way, these totals are accumulative. They're not new words introduced to each level. And so this means that between what you can see here and the phrasal verb word list, or maybe using a concordance, and as well as our precious course books, we're able to know more or less what phrasal verbs are suitable for our students, and therefore we need to teach them these words. And there are several ways to go about this. First up, should we teach them by main verb, where students learn groups of words that have the same main verb? For example, let's take look, and we have look up, look after, look into. This can actually lead to a lot of confusion, as the differences in form are so minor. The only difference is the particle, and so it's not really the easiest way to help our students learn new phrasal verbs. So the next way then, by particle. Here, this is where students learn groups of verbs which have the same particle. For example, on, carry on, hang on, go on, these type of phrasal verbs. And this is beneficial in that it can often help our students understand the concept of the particle, what the particle really means, and how it alters the verb. And we're going to look at that a little bit later. Another way is by usage. So here students learn groups of verbs that are linked to a common theme. For example, relationships, go out with, fall out, break up. It's a three phrasal verb story right there. And this can provide interesting teaching opportunities. You can include a lot of stories and authentic texts, and it allows the phrasal verbs to be the vehicle of communication according to the topic, rather than just the focus. And lastly, by exploiting them as they appear. So students learn the phrasal verbs as they naturally appear in text or on a needs basis. So for example, if you come across something, take a moment to talk about it. Or if a student is missing that little lexical chunk when they're trying to say something, provide it. Or provide it to the whole class. Emergent language is equally important here as well. So now our students have the words, we're going to explore some of the typical difficulties that phrasal verbs can give our learners. And we'll begin with the issue of comprehension. That is to say, difficulties with understanding the message. And one of the most common problems is failure to understand the idiomatic meaning. So, for example, they kissed and made up as usual. And in this case, make up to forgive someone and then be friendly with them again after an argument. And students are likely to know the words make and up, but when they come together as a phrasal verb, this is often a completely new and, unless you talk about it, sort of unexpected or surprising meaning. The next issue can be multiple meanings for the same phrasal verb. So, lying on the ground after being tackled hard, he eventually came round. Now, to come round can have several meanings. One can be to visit someone at their home, or to become conscious, which I think is the one there, well, it's the one I've chosen here. but it can also mean to change your opinion of something and for a regular event to happen at its usual time. So several meanings for the same phrasal verb, and deciding which one can cause some problems. And finally, when there is a long separation between the verb and particle. Can you please drop the spare boxes of glass and china off? So students might hear the word drop and hear the boxes of glass and china. Then if they completely miss the particle, the off, that off alters the whole meaning, and hopefully they don't literally drop the glasses. That would be another problem. And the danger of this obviously only occurs to those phrasal verbs that are separable. So besides comprehension issues, there are also difficulties in the sphere of production. That is when students are actively using phrasal verbs in speaking and writing. And I know quite a few of these. What you're about to see won't come as any surprise to you teachers out there. So perhaps it's more of a reminder about what we have to watch out for to help correct and support our learners with. Leaving out particles. I look forward to your visit. Well, I'm sorry, needed to in there. I look forward to your visit. Using the wrong particle. You worked up the answer easily. Here we go. He worked out the answer easily. So we need to change up for out. Adding a particle when it is not needed. So sometimes students go the extra mile in a way. They think I really need to put one in there when actually they don't. They just need that verb. So my mum accidentally dropped off the soup and it made a big mess. The off needs to be removed. Word order. I swear I'm not making up it. I swear I'm not making it up. Remember, when we have an object pronoun, it needs to go between the verb and the particle. Avoidance. So a student might say, you should make more order in your room, when in actual fact, what would have made more sense would have been to say, you should tidy up your room, or you should sort out your room. And now, avoidance is a valid coping strategy in the sense that a student can often still get the meaning across, but what it might unintentionally result in is incorrect register by sounding too formal. If they use, for example, the Latin verbs, or they might then even make more mistakes as they try to sort of, in a roundabout way, get to the meaning of what they want to say. And of course, students are unlikely to ever improve if they never make any attempt to use phrasal verbs. So avoidance can be an issue. And finally, register. Example here, excuse me, sir, would you like to cough up for your meal now? When in actual fact, excuse me, sir, would you like to pay for your meal now? Though I would love to see the look on a customer's face if they're ever asked that question at the end of their 5-course Michelin-starred dinner. Might actually be appropriate. All right, so the difficulties, they've all been laid bare. Now, how can we help us students with them? So we're going to see 10 tips that can make a difference when teaching phrasal verbs, especially over the length of a course. Number 1, mind the text being worked on, such as the audios or reading text for phrasal verbs. So don't be just restricted to the exercises in your course book. Use the transcripts and the reading text for extra vocabulary. Exploit what's right in front of you. Number 2, draw attention to phrasal verbs as they appear, particularly ones with an idiomatic meaning. Now, this has been mentioned before, but I feel it's worth repeating. The ones that have that idiomatic meaning with words that students are familiar with, they're so easy to overlook, but they're often the ones that cause surprises. So focus on them, explicitly point them out. 3, ask clear CCQs to clarify meaning, especially of idiomatic phrasal verbs. This is partly linked to the one above, And CCQs, by the way, concept checking questions. So these are questions to really ensure students have grasped the meaning of the phrasal verb. 4, use matching tasks or activities in class. Well, as we've seen, phrasal verbs have different parts, which means that they can be taken apart and put back together, unless it's an inseparable verb. No, just kidding. So that makes them ideal for matching tasks where you can put things together. Number 5, be aware of exam needs. For example, the Cambridge B2 and C1 reading use of English in parts 1, 2, and 4, they often, phrasal verbs can crop up there, they can appear. So our students need to be prepared for that. Ensure learners record new vocabulary properly. This can include the register, saying whether it's formal or informal, collocations that go with it, and an example, which is especially useful for phrasal verbs that have more than one meaning. 7, lucky number 7. Be aware of the different learner expectations. So with the Cambridge chart or graph that we saw before, the expectations are different from B1 to B2. So we need to be aware of that. And yeah, this is crucial because we don't want students to feel overwhelmed at lower levels. However, we also have to be realistic about the expectations. Number 8, working on phrasal verbs a little bit often can make a big difference. So as we saw above, there are expectations, but these expectations don't happen overnight. They are steadily built up, little by little, over the duration of a course. Number 9, encourage exposure to English outside of the classroom. So class is great, but responsibility also has to fall on our students to improve. And as we've seen, phrasal verbs occur all the time when speaking. So any listening to podcasts or TV series, or better yet, conversation exchanges, is likely to increase the exposure to phrasal verbs. And as a result, a better chance of learning them. And finally, number 10, help learners to conceptualize the particle. And for this one, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive. So let's go on to the next slide about conceptualizing the particle. So what do I mean by this? Well, as the heading says, we're specifically looking at the particle. That means the up, the on, the at. And we're attempting to understand its inner logic, its core essence, if you will. And the reason for this is that instead of just trying to memorize that such and such a phrasal verb means this, you can actually understand why it has that specific meaning, how the particle alters the verb, and hopefully realize that phrasal verbs, they're not so arbitrary or idiomatic as you might have first thought. And in a moment, I'm going to show you a short video about the particle up. But before you do, there are 3 things to keep in mind. Okay, 3 concepts to keep in mind when examining phrasal verbs. So the first is that we exist in space. And I don't mean outer space where ET lives, but fundamentally we, me, you, literally everyone, we exist in space. And within the space, we can move, or we can stay still, or we can orientate ourselves in different directions. Secondly, there are always different perspectives for the same thing. For example, right now, I am sitting on a chair, at a desk, in a classroom, and on the planet Earth. Nothing has changed except the perspective. And thirdly, the spectrum of meaning. This is that literal meanings can be extended to metaphorical meanings. So there is a spectrum. An easy example, to step down. So you can literally step down, where you move from a well, where you, with your foot, you step down from a high position to a lower position. And then there's the sort of slightly more metaphorical where he stepped down as president, for example. So in that case, this person is leaving a prominent position to a lower position. So in a nutshell, the magical thing with language is that we can cleverly indicate these different perspectives and movement and orientation and conceptual metaphors simply by attaching the particle to a verb. All right, philosophy lecture over. So the video clip you're about to see was made by a fellow Antipodean, Christian, and he's an English teacher with his own YouTube channel called Kangaroo English. And in one of his videos, he gives an excellent explanation of some of the various ways to perceive the particle up and the phrasal verbs that use them. So enjoy and keep an eye out for his interesting choice of prop. The link you see right there on the screen, that's just there if you ever want to see the complete video. So here we go.
First, let's look at the particle up. The principal meaning of up is a movement through space in this direction. The biscuit is moving up. And this helps us to understand the basic verb and preposition combinations, like, for example, to pick up a biscuit, or the biscuit goes up the mountain. But this movement through space in this direction also helps us to understand the more abstract verbs which contain up. Here on my plate I have one biscuit. As I start to add biscuits, as I have a greater quantity of biscuits, you can see that the stack moves in this direction, up. So phrasal verbs which contain up can talk about a greater quantity of something. So when I ask you to speak up, I'm asking you to increase the level of your voice. But also, 5 biscuits is better than 1 biscuit. So up can also indicate that something is improving, something is better than before. So if I go out to a special occasion, maybe I will dress up. I will dress up in improved, better clothes. Up can also talk about orientation in space. Look at this packet of biscuits. Would you say that it's up? No, because this end is open. So this is the top, where you can access the biscuits. So now the packet of biscuits is up. It's in the correct orientation. It's ready for action. It is prepared. And from this idea, we get the phrasal verbs such as set up a business, to put your business in the correct orientation, to be prepared. Or before you exercise, you warm up. You prepare your body for action. Now, a question for you. How many biscuits do I have on this plate? You don't know? Well, it's because you can't see them. Let me bring them up. Now you can see I have 3 biscuits. When I move something up, I bring it into your vision. Because remember, the human experience, how we experience the world, affects our language. So when we bring something up, we make it visible. And now we can understand phrasal verbs like to go up to somebody at a party. So when you come closer to them, they can see you. And also, when something is in our vision, we can start to know it, to understand it. So coming up, seeing something, is a synonym for understanding. And this helps us to understand phrasal verbs like look up a word in the dictionary, or read up about the English language. To understand the final meaning of up, it's really important to use your perspective. So here I have 4 biscuits on a plate. Now imagine that I eat them all. Now my body, my stomach is full. I am full up. So from one perspective, you could say that this vessel, this container is full, which helps you to understand phrasal verbs like to fill up. But if we look at this perspective, we can see that the biscuits are gone. The plate is empty. It's the opposite meaning, and that helps you to understand phrasal verbs like use up. The battery in my phone is completely used up. First,
and there we go. So what you can see on the screen right now is a summary of the different ways that Christian mentioned that up can be used. And believe it or not, there are still more. This is but a small window into the world of the conceptual metaphor, but one which I hope has awakened you to taking a closer look at the influence of the particle on the verb. Because by having a deeper understanding of it, you unlock the meaning, and it's not only up, it's all of them. And if our students know that, then it would help them immensely. And by the way, fun fact I discovered while researching this webinar, according to the Cambridge Dictionary of Phrasal Verbs, pick up has 24 different meanings. Although obviously the frequency of some of those meanings is likely to be quite low. Now into the classroom. On this slide, I'm going to share some really simple things or activities that don't require any or much preparation, but which can provide some useful practice of phrasal verbs, or at least raise awareness of them. So first up, matching activities, Pelmanism or dominoes. Because, as you know, phrasal verbs consist of more than one part and means, like I mentioned before, they're perfectly set up for matching tasks. The classic Pelmanism, similar to well, it is the memory game where you turn over a card and then another and see if they match, and then get to keep them. Now that could be the verb and the particle, or it could be the phrasal verb on one card and its Latin equivalent, or more formal equivalent on another card. You could even have the phrasal verb and a definition, especially of the idiomatic ones. There's a lot of scope for separating them or doing this how you want. And then there is the dominoes game, the classic. So the way I often do it is like this. So we have, for example, a verb and a particle on one domino, and then someone comes along and needs to attach another one to make a complete phrasal verb come across. And then that person, if they get it correctly, needs to use it in a sentence. So I came across an old photo of you yesterday. And this way they're able to demonstrate that they, not only can they match them, but they can actually use them. So that they've grasped the meaning of it. For the next activity, all you need are, you just need 2 dice. Something every teacher, I imagine, has lying around the classroom somewhere, maybe under a desk or a chair. So 1 die can represent the verbs. So number 1 would mean get, 2 take, 3 turn, 4 come, 5 go, 6 bring. And then the other die would represent the particle. So what you can see there on the screen. And a student would roll both of them, and then they have to make a correct sentence with the numbers that were rolled. For example, if I rolled a 1 on the verb die, so I need the verb get, and then roll the particle die and I get a 4, I might say, I get up early every day. And a piece of advice though, when doing this, Be aware of the various combinations that are made or can be made here, and make sure that all of the verbs can go with all of the particles. Or if you're not, or if you're one short, like I've got here, maybe put a free in as well. All right, include authentic material, especially listenings. And this could be interviews, YouTubers, everything that's out there on YouTube. So, as mentioned before, a lot of phrasal verbs are found in the spoken form. So we need to expose our students to that. And by using authentic material, we're also preparing them for life outside of a classroom. You know, they're not always going to be listening to us, the patient teachers. So obviously you would need a task to go with this if you're using a listening, but it could be as simple as just take note of at least 3 phrasal verbs that you hear while you listen. That's still a task. Sets of flashcards, also useful for self-study. By flashcards, I mean a small piece of card or paper that has something written on both sides. And similar to what I said before about the Pelmanism, this could be a verb on one side and a particle or particles on the other, or the verb and its translation. And having sets of these means that students can test each other in pairs at the start of a lesson, for example, or even just have some individual time consolidating the vocabulary. And for the really keen ones, they can make them at home to study there as well. I used to do that with French and it worked. All right, lastly, images that include or easily elicit a phrasal verb, like cartoons or movie posters. And this is a personal favorite of mine. And using images that include or are able to easily elicit a phrasal verb, well, if they include one and students don't know it, well, then you've instantly generated discussion there, got them talking. And it's not as overwhelming as learning a huge list from a long text. 1 or 2 images every now and then over time can really make a difference, and students can see the progress. And you can also test them later with the same images to see if they recall them. So that's what I'm going to show you right now. So right here we go, a couple of movie posters and a Far Side cartoon by Gary Larson. The Titanic poster has the phrasal verb in the caption, the come between there. Whereas the second poster, Get Out, it's right there in the name. Fantastic film, highly recommend it, by the way. And the cartoon, we have Harold, the dog's trying to blow up the house again. Catch him in the act or he'll never learn. So we have the phrasal verb blow up and the funny or strange situation where the owners are treating the dog as if he's peeing inside rather than attempted murder, and they're most concerned about teaching him. So anyway, to test, you could simply blank out the words and see if the students remember what phrasal verb was there, or just the particle even. So for example, look at the screen right now. For example, get. Get what? Get out. Well, no, not you, not yet. We've still got the conclusions to go through. So then you're welcome to get out. All right, conclusions. Let's have a run through the key takeaways from today's webinar. First up, phrasal verbs are vital for a learner's ability to communicate effectively, particularly with receptive understanding. As you know, a lot of communication, especially spoken, uses phrasal verbs all the time. And so our students have to be able to manage that. And what this means is that they don't necessarily have to produce phrasal verbs themselves to be understood. it would be great if they did, but they do need to be able to understand the language that's coming in that they're receiving. Secondly, understanding the particle can go a long way towards grasping the meaning. As you saw in the video, and I referred to it as conceptualizing the particle, this really helps to cut to the true meaning of the phrasal verb. And that is to say, to understand why this particle was used and how it alters the meaning of the verb. Next. Knowledge of phrasal verbs adds a layer of naturalness or informality to speaking. Fairly self-explanatory. If students can use or use and include phrasal verbs appropriately in their communication, then it just flows. Okay. Use evidence-based data to inform vocabulary selection. And this refers to making sensible judgments about what our students actually need. For example, the Cambridge research about the different levels, and also perhaps just having a critical eye when it comes to other sources. The penultimate point. Draw special attention to phrasal verbs where learners are likely to know the individual words, but not the combined meaning. And yes, like I said, feels like a long time ago now, these are the phrasal verbs that we often need to guide our students towards, or even explicitly point out. And this is so that they're able to make that connection that what I'm seeing, okay, I know these words, but what I'm seeing is actually something new. And last but not least, incorporate phrasal verbs a little bit often in class and with a variety of tasks. You know, we want to keep our students engaged with the language, not to overwhelm them with all the possibilities that exist. And we want them to feel like they're making progress, because then when you look back, it all adds up. And there you have it. All about phrasal verbs. So that means it's question and answer time. So please, if you have any questions at all, feel free to write them in the chat. Gives you some time to do that, and I'll endeavor to give you my best answer there. So any questions for those out there? Well, it looks like maybe people are a little shy today, or yes, or oh, maybe not. Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for watching. And well, there's just a little bit more to go, which I'll just put up now. So what we have, yes, that almost wraps it up. But before I sign off, just remember that in a few months, we'll be back with another webinar in our ongoing series. The next one is titled Memory and Language Learning, which sounds really fascinating. And it's going to be given by Inigo Cassis. So sure to be an interesting, entertaining, and informative webinar for you to enjoy. Pencil it in your diaries now. And ultimately, thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure hosting you today. If you have any further questions, feel free to email me at sam@london-school.com. The webinar will also be uploaded onto the platform at london-school-online.com, where you can watch it again and again if you feel like it, or if you missed something and you want to go back and check. We also have our social media platforms, which regularly post interesting teaching tips, articles, and things going on here at the London School of Languages. So I definitely, I highly recommend checking those out as well. And now we have well and truly come to the end. So thank you once again and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.